stood at the observation window and watched the stars burn in the darkness. Her 4 eyes reflected the distant light of 1,000 suns, but she was not thinking about the beauty of space. She was thinking about the war that had killed millions and the impossible task she had chosen to accept. The diplomatic station orbited the neutral moon of, a place where neither human nor weapons were allowed. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of peace, but knew that peace was just a word people used when they were too tired to keep fighting. The real question was whether anyone truly wanted the fighting to stop. 8 years of war had broken both civilizations. Human colonies burned in the Outer Ring territories. Cities lay in ruins on a dozen worlds. The young died while the old made speeches about honor and sacrifice. Had watched her own brother march off to war 3 years ago, and she had buried what remained of him 6 months later. That was when she decided that someone had to do something different. The door behind her opened with a soft hiss. Her father, Ambassador, entered the room with heavy steps. His silver-blue skin had grown pale with age and worry, and his 4 eyes carried the weight of too many failed negotiations. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "There will be other ways to find peace." Turn to face him. "We have tried other ways for 8 years, father. Diplomats talk and soldiers die. Nothing changes." A marriage to a human will not change anything either. It is a symbol, nothing more. "Symbols matter," said. "If one and one human can stand together, perhaps others will believe that coexistence is possible." Her father closed his eyes. When he opened them again, she saw tears forming in the corners. "You are my only remaining child. I cannot lose you too." Crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "You will not lose me. I will simply gain a husband." "A human husband," her father whispered, as if the words themselves carried poison. "Yes, a human husband." The ceremony was scheduled for the following day. Representatives from both civilizations had gathered on the station to witness what many called either a desperate hope or a terrible mistake. Had read the comments on the information networks. Half of her own people called her a traitor. The humans were no kinder to the man who had agreed to marry her. She had not yet met Daniel Cole. She knew only what the files told her. He was 34 years old. He had served as a Marine in the Human Defense Force for 12 years before transferring to the Diplomatic Corps. He had fought in 7 major battles, including the terrible defeat at Horizon Prime, where an entire human fleet was destroyed. He had received numerous medals for bravery and been wounded 4 times. The files also noted that he had no living family members. Understood why the human government had chosen him. A man with no family would have no one to object to the marriage. No parents to convince, no siblings to comfort, no children to explain the decision to. Daniel Cole was alone in the universe, which made him the perfect candidate for a symbolic union that nobody actually wanted. She met him for the first time in the ceremonial chamber, just 3 hours before they would speak their vows. He stood near the far wall, wearing a simple dark uniform with his military decorations removed. He was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had seen hard work. His brown hair was cut short, and his eyes were a pale gray color that reminded her of storm clouds. What struck her most were the scars. A long white line ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Smaller marks covered his hands and disappeared beneath his sleeves. These were not the clean scars of surgical procedures. These were the marks of violence survived. "I am," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting she had practiced. He looked at her hand for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm but gentle. "Daniel Cole." "I know. I read your file." "I read yours too." His voice was flat without emotion. "You volunteered for this." "Yes." "Why?" Considered the question carefully. "Because someone had to, and I would rather it be someone who believes in peace than someone who does not." Daniel released her hand and turned to look out the window at the gathered ships from both fleets. "Peace is just the time between wars. That is what my commanding officer used to say." "What do you believe?" He was silent for a long moment. "I believe that people keep dying while we argue about words." The ceremony itself was brief and formal. A human official and a priest spoke the traditional words of their respective cultures, and Daniel stood side by side and made their vows before cameras that broadcast their union to billions of watching eyes. When the priest told Daniel he could kiss his bride, he leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to her forehead. It was the most distant form of affection possible, and understood the message. This was duty, not love. She had not expected anything different. The celebration afterward was tense. Human and guests occupied opposite sides of the reception hall, eyeing each other with suspicion even as they raised their glasses in toasts to peace and unity, smiled and accepted congratulations from strangers who did not mean their kind words. That night, she and Daniel entered their shared quarters for the first time. It was a comfortable space with separate sleeping areas, designed by diplomats who understood that this marriage was a political arrangement rather than a romantic one. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the floor, stood near the window, watching the stars again. "I will not pretend to know what you have experienced," she finally said, "but I want you to know that I did not choose this to insult you or your people. I chose it because I am tired of death." Daniel looked up at her. Something flickered in those gray eyes, some emotion that disappeared before she could identify it. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow they will want us to smile for more cameras." He turned away and lay down on his bed without removing his clothes. Within minutes, his breathing became slow and even. Remained at the window for a long time, wondering what kind of man she had married and whether this desperate gamble would save anyone at all. Outside, the stars continued to burn in their eternal silence, indifferent to the hopes and fears of the small creatures who reached toward them. 6 months passed like water through open fingers. Learned to read the silences that Daniel carried with him like old wounds. She learned that he took his coffee black and strong, that he exercised for exactly 1 hour every morning before dawn, and that he never slept for more than 4 hours at a time before the nightmares woke him. She never asked about the nightmares. She simply made sure there was warm tea waiting when he emerged from his room with haunted eyes and trembling hands. Their work as peace ambassadors took them across the contested territories. They visited colonies that had changed hands 3 times during the war, places where the buildings still showed the scars of orbital bombardment, and the people still flinched at loud noises. Human and survivors lived in the same refugee camps now, separated by invisible lines of hatred and fear. Daniel rarely spoke during these visits. He walked through the camps with his hands clasped behind his back, observing everything with those storm-gray eyes, gave the speeches and shook the hands and made the promises that diplomats always made. But she noticed that people watched Daniel more than they watched her. They were afraid of him. Both species recognized a warrior when they saw one. On the planet called Haven's Rest, they visited a camp that held over 30,000 refugees. The local administrator, a tired human woman named, guided them through rows of temporary shelters that had become permanent homes. "The children suffer most," said. "Many of them have lost everyone. We do what we can, but there are so many." Nodded and prepared another diplomatic response, but Daniel had stopped walking. He stood at the edge of a small clearing where a group of children played with a worn ball. Human children and children together, their differences forgotten in the simple joy of a game. One small girl sat apart from the others. She could not have been older than 6 years, with the light purple skin of the northern provinces and eyes that held too much sorrow for such a young face. She watched the other children play, but made no move to join them. Daniel walked over and crouched down beside her, watched in surprise as he spoke quietly to the child, his voice too low for her to hear. The girl looked up at him with those sad eyes and said something in response. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a metal coin of some kind, old and worn smooth from years of handling. He showed the girl a simple trick, making the coin appear to vanish and then reappear behind her ear. The girl smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant and fragile, but it was real. Daniel spent the next hour sitting with the children. He taught them the coin trick and showed them how to fold paper into the shapes of birds and stars. He did not speak much, but when he did, his voice was gentle in a way that had never heard before. She understood something important in that moment. The scars on his body were not the only wounds Daniel carried. There were deeper injuries that no surgeon could heal. 3 weeks later, they attended a memorial service on a colony world. Was speaking to a group of local officials when she heard a commotion near the entrance. She turned just in time to see a figure rushing toward her with a blade raised. The world slowed down. She saw the hatred in the attacker's 4 eyes, saw the light gleaming on the knife, saw her own death approaching with terrible speed. Then Daniel was there. He moved faster than she thought possible, stepping between her and the blade. The knife meant for her heart buried itself in his shoulder instead. Daniel grunted in pain but did not fall. His hand closed around the attacker's wrist with crushing force, and he twisted until the would-be assassin dropped to the ground. Security officers swarmed the area. Someone was shouting for a medical team. Could only stare at Daniel, who stood with blood running down his arm and soaking into his shirt. "You are hurt," she whispered. "I have had worse." He swayed slightly, and she caught his arm to steady him. The medical team arrived and took Daniel away, followed them to the station's medical center, and refused to leave until she knew he would survive. The blade had missed the major blood vessels, but he would need several days to recover. She sat beside his bed while he slept, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. When he finally opened his eyes, she was still there. "You should not have done that," she said. "You could have died." "That was the idea." Frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel turned his head to look at her. The drugs in his system had loosened something inside him, and for the first time she saw past his defenses to the broken man beneath. "I had a squad," he said slowly, 12 Marines. We served together for 5 years. They were my family when I had no other." He paused, gathering strength to continue. "At Horizon Prime, we were ordered to hold a civilian hospital that our intelligence said was being used as a military command center. The intelligence was wrong. There were no soldiers there, just doctors and patients and children." Felt her throat tighten. "The counterattack came at dawn. My squad held the perimeter while I evacuated the hospital. I saved 412 civilians that day." His voice cracked. "And I lost everyone I ever loved doing it." Tears spilled from his eyes. "Daniel, I volunteered for this marriage because I thought maybe I could die for something meaningful, something that might actually help." He laughed bitterly. "I did not expect to actually start caring about the outcome." Reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough against her smooth skin, but she did not let go. "I will not let you throw your life away," she said firmly. "I need you to live, not for the peace process, not for the cameras. I need you to live because I have started caring about the outcome too." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, his fingers tightened around hers. "There is tea in my quarters," she said. "When you are well enough, perhaps you would like to share a meal with me. A real meal, not these diplomatic dinners where everyone watches our every bite." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "I would like that." It was a small thing, a shared meal between two people who had been strangers. But as walked back to her quarters that night, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt hope. 1 year after their wedding, woke to find Daniel already awake beside her. His arm was wrapped around her waist, and his breath was warm against her neck. She smiled and pressed closer to him, savoring this quiet moment before the demands of the day pulled them apart. Their relationship had changed slowly, like ice melting in spring. The shared meals became long conversations. The long conversations became gentle touches. The gentle touches became something deeper, something that neither of them had expected or planned. They kept their love hidden from the public eye. The marriage was supposed to be a symbol, not a romance, and both human and governments preferred to maintain that fiction. Behind closed doors, however, they had built something real. The trade negotiations resume today, Daniel murmured against her hair. The delegation arrives at noon. I know, my uncle is leading them. Daniel's arm tightened slightly. He had never met High Minister, but he had read the files. His uncle was a powerful figure in politics, known for his conservative views and his belief that humans were an inferior species. He had opposed the peace process from the beginning. Will you be all right seeing him? Sighed, has never approved of me. When I was young, he told my father that I asked too many questions and showed too much sympathy for those beneath our station. He meant the lower classes, but I suspect he would say the same about humans now. He sounds charming. He is dangerous, and he hates everything this marriage represents. The negotiations that day were tense but productive. The territorial disputes that had sparked the war were finally being resolved through compromise rather than combat. Trade routes were being established. Prisoner exchanges were moving forward. After 8 long years, peace seemed genuinely possible. Watched her uncle throughout the sessions. High Minister said all the correct words and made all the proper gestures, but something in his 4 eyes made her uneasy. He smiled too easily and agreed too quickly. The uncle she remembered had never been so cooperative. During a break in the talks, she found herself standing near him at the refreshment table. He turned to her with that strange smile. Niece, you look well. Human food must agree with you. Uncle, it is good to see you participating in the peace process. I am a servant of our people. When the government decides on a course of action, I support it. He lowered his voice, even when that course is misguided. Peace is not misguided. Peace with humans, shook his head slowly. They are animals, clever animals who have learned to build starships, but animals nonetheless. This treaty will not last. Their nature will assert itself eventually, and when it does, our people will suffer for your naive dreams. Felt cold anger rising in her chest. My husband saved 400 lives at Horizon Prime. He took a blade meant for me without hesitation. If that is the nature of animals, then perhaps we should learn from them. Smile faded. Your husband is a trained killer. Whatever affection he shows you is merely a performance. When the time comes, he will turn on you like all his kind. You do not know him. I know enough. Placed his cup on the table and leaned close to her ear. Enjoy your peace while it lasts, niece. Nothing built on such a weak foundation can stand for long. He walked away, leaving with a knot of worry in her stomach. That night she told Daniel about the conversation. He listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each word. Something is wrong, she said. My uncle would never support peace unless he had another plan. What kind of plan? I do not know, but I intend to find out. Over the following weeks, paid careful attention to her uncle's movements and communications. She noticed that he spent long hours in private meetings with members of his delegation. She noticed that certain ships in the fleet were being moved to unusual positions. She noticed that encrypted messages were being sent through unofficial channels. Daniel used his own contacts to investigate. He reached out to old friends from his Marine days, people who still served in human military intelligence. What they told him was disturbing. Admiral Vincent Corso, Daniel said one evening, showing a file on his tablet. He commands the human Third Fleet and controls most of our military operations in the Outer Ring. He has opposed the peace treaty from the beginning. Why? Because war is profitable. Defense contracts, supply chains, reconstruction projects. A lot of powerful people have made fortunes from this conflict. Peace would end their income stream. Studied the admiral's face. He had cold eyes and a thin mouth that looked like it had never smiled. You think he is working with my uncle? I think powerful people on both sides want this war to continue, and I think they are willing to do terrible things to make that happen. 3 days later, Daniel received a coded message from one of his contacts. A fleet of ships with false identification codes was gathering at a secret location in the outer ring. The ships were registered as military vessels, but they were transmitting in human military codes. A false flag attack, Daniel said grimly. They are going to destroy a human colony while making it look like they did it, or possibly the reverse. Either way, the peace treaty dies and the war continues. When asked, Daniel checked the data again. His face went pale. The attack is planned for the day of the treaty signing ceremony, 3 days from now. Felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, was about to be destroyed. We have to warn someone. Who? We do not know how deep this conspiracy goes. Corso has allies throughout the human government, and your uncle clearly has support among them. If we go to the wrong person, we could trigger the attack early or simply disappear. Looked at the man she loved, the man she had learned to trust with her life. Then what do we do? Daniel's jaw tightened. We stop it ourselves. How? I do not know yet, but we have 72 hours to figure it out. He took her hand and held it tightly. Outside their window, the stars burned on, indifferent to the desperate plans being made by small creatures who dared to hope for peace. 68 hours remained before the treaty signing ceremony when Daniel made the call he had been avoiding for 3 years. The face that appeared on his screen was older than he remembered, with new lines around the eyes and gray streaks in the dark hair. Danny Cole. Grace leaned back in her chair and smiled. I thought you were dead. Not yet. I need your help, Grace. You always did. What kind of trouble are you in this time? Daniel explained the situation quickly, watching Grace's expression shift from amusement to concern to something that looked like fear. She had served with him at Horizon Prime. She knew what was at stake. A false flag attack, she said when he finished. That is some high-level conspiracy thinking, Danny. You have proof. Enough to know it is real, not enough to convince anyone official. So you want to stop it yourself? I want us to stop it. Your company still operates in the outer ring, does it not? Grace ran a private security company now, protecting merchant vessels and mining operations in the lawless regions of space. She had ships and crew and connections that official channels could not match. You want me to take on the combined forces of human and military conspirators? She shook her head slowly. You always were crazy, Danny. Will you help? Grace was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled again, and it was the smile Daniel remembered from the old days, the smile of a woman who never backed down from a fight. Send me the coordinates. I will see what I can do. While Daniel coordinated with Grace, used her diplomatic access to trace the movements of her uncle's fleet. She discovered that the ships involved in the conspiracy were gathering at an abandoned mining station in the asteroid belt, far from any official patrols. 12 ships, she reported. 6 cruisers and 6 vessels with no registered identification. The attack force will be more than enough to destroy a colony. Which colony are they targeting? Pulled up a star map. Based on their position and the timing of the ceremony, they could reach 3 possible targets. New Geneva, where the treaty will be signed, Prime itself, or the refugee settlement on Haven's Rest. Daniel felt his blood run cold. The children. What? If they attack Haven's Rest, they kill thousands of refugees from both species. It would be the perfect provocation. Both governments would blame each other. Closed her eyes. 30,000 people, including all those children we met. We will not let it happen. How, even with your friend's help, we cannot fight 12 warships? Daniel stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the stars for a long moment before turning back to face her. We do not need to fight them. We just need to expose them. If we can broadcast the truth to both civilizations before the attack happens, the conspiracy falls apart. Even if they proceed, everyone will know it was a false flag. The war will not restart. Broadcasting requires access to their communications array. That means boarding the flagship. Yes. Understood what he was suggesting. You want to infiltrate an enemy warship with a data recorder and somehow reach their bridge long enough to transmit a confession to the entire galaxy. That is the general idea. That is suicide. Maybe. Daniel crossed the room and took her hands in his. But it is also the only chance we have. Grace can get us close. Her ships have stealth capabilities that the conspiracy will not expect. Once we are aboard, we fight our way to the bridge and broadcast everything we know. We shook her head firmly. No, you are not going alone. This is dangerous beyond anything you have experienced. I was trained for this kind of operation. You were trained to negotiate treaties. I was also trained to shoot, Daniel. Every child learns to defend themselves. And more importantly, those are ships with security systems. You need me to get through the doors. I cannot risk losing you. And I cannot sit here while you throw your life away for a hopeless cause. Her 4 eyes blazed with determination. You told me once that humans are not stronger or smarter than other species. You said that humans are simply too stubborn to quit when they should. I did say that. Well, can be stubborn too, and you married one. They stared at each other for a long moment. Daniel saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen when she volunteered for their marriage a year ago. She would not back down. Fine, he said finally, we go together. Grace arrived at the station with 3 fast ships and a crew of 40 experienced fighters. Most of them were veterans like Daniel, soldiers who had grown tired of a war that seemed to have no end. They listened to his briefing with grim faces and nodded their understanding. We hit them hard and fast, Grace said. My ships will engage their outer pickets and create a distraction. That gives Danny and time to board the flagship and reach the bridge. What about extraction? One of the crew members asked. Grace glanced at Daniel. Neither of them answered. The crew understood. This was a one-way mission. The only thing that mattered was getting the truth out before they died. Spent the final hours before departure preparing a full data package. She compiled evidence of the conspiracy, recordings of her uncle's suspicious communications, financial records linking Admiral Corso to weapons manufacturers, and a personal statement explaining why she and Daniel had chosen this path. If we succeed, she said, this will be broadcast to every inhabited world in both civilizations. Daniel checked his weapons one last time, and if we fail, then at least we tried. He put down his gun and pulled her close. They held each other in silence, 2 people who had started as strangers and become something more than either had imagined possible. I love you, Daniel said quietly. I did not expect to, I did not want to, but I do. Pressed her forehead against his. I love you too. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that this past year has been the happiest of my life. They kissed, long and deep, and then they walked together to the shuttle bay where Grace's ship was waiting. 42 hours remained before the attack. The stars watched in silence as the small fleet slipped into the darkness, carrying the last hope of peace toward an impossible battle. The flagship's silent blade hung in the darkness of the asteroid belt like a sleeping predator. Daniel studied it through the viewport of Grace's shuttle as they approached under stealth protocols. The ship was massive, built for war rather than diplomacy. its hull bristling with weapons that could turn a city to ash in seconds. "Security patrols every 12 minutes, Grace reported through his earpiece. "You have a window of about 8 minutes to reach the bridge once you breach the hull." "Understood." Checked her sidearm one final time. She had changed into practical combat clothing, and Daniel thought she looked more like a soldier than a diplomat now. The transformation suited her. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let us do this anyway." The shuttle docked silently against the flagship's lower hull, attaching itself to an emergency airlock that had identified as a weak point in the ship's security. Within moments, she had bypassed the access codes and the inner door slid open. The corridor beyond was empty. Daniel moved first, weapon raised with close behind. They had memorized the ship's layout and knew exactly which path would take them to the bridge. They encountered their first guards at the third intersection. Two soldiers stood at a security checkpoint, their attention focused on a monitoring station. Daniel took them both down before they could raise an alarm, using a neural disruptor that left them unconscious but alive. 5 minutes, Grace warned. They moved faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. More guards appeared and proved that her training had not been exaggerated. She shot with precision and moved with grace, covering Daniel's blind spots as they fought their way through the ship. The bridge doors loomed before them, massive and heavily reinforced. Pressed her hand against the security panel, and Daniel heard her whispering a prayer in her native language. The doors opened. High Minister stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by officers from both species. His 4 eyes widened when he saw, then narrowed with cold fury. "Niece, I wondered when you would appear." "It is over, Uncle," raised her weapon. "We know everything, the false flag attack, your alliance with Admiral Corso, all of it." Laughed softly. "You know nothing. Even if you stop this attack, there will be others. The war must continue. It is the natural order of things." "There is nothing natural about murder." Daniel moved to the communications console while kept her weapon trained on her uncle. The officers on the bridge seemed uncertain, their eyes moving between and the intruders. Some of them were human, Daniel noticed. The conspiracy truly crossed all boundaries. "Do not touch that console," warned. "My guards will kill you both before you can transmit a single word." "Your guards are busy," Daniel replied. Outside, the sounds of combat echoed through the corridors. Grace's team had begun their assault on the ship's outer sections, drawing security forces away from the bridge. He connected the data recorder to the communications array and began the upload. Within seconds, everything they had gathered was streaming across every frequency, bouncing off relay stations and spreading to every corner of both civilizations. "No," lunged forward, but shot caught him in the leg and sent him crashing to the deck. "It is done," Daniel said. "Everyone knows now." The bridge fell silent except for ragged breathing. The officers stared at their stations, watching as the truth spread across the galaxy. Reports began flooding in almost immediately. Admiral Corso had been arrested on New Geneva. Security forces were moving against allies. The conspiracy was collapsing. "You have destroyed everything," hissed from the floor. "The peace will not last. Humans and were never meant to coexist." Crouched beside him. "You are wrong, Uncle. Daniel and I are proof that coexistence is possible. We chose to love each other despite everything that said we should be enemies. If we can do that, so can others." Love spat the word like poison. "You are a fool." "Perhaps, but I am a fool who stopped a war." Daniel helped to her feet. The bridge crew had surrendered, laying down their weapons as the reality of their situation became clear. The attack would not happen. The conspiracy was finished. "Daniel," Grace's voice crackled through the communicator. "We have secured the ship but triggered a destruct sequence before you arrived. You have about 10 minutes to reach an escape pod." They moved quickly, leaving for the security teams to collect. The corridors were littered with unconscious guards and smoking debris from the fighting. Grace's people had been thorough. They reached the escape pod bay with 3 minutes to spare. Daniel strapped into her seat and then took his own position as the pod launched into space. Behind them, the silent blade broke apart in a ball of fire. The rescue ships found them 2 hours later, drifting among the asteroids while the remains of the conspiracy fleet burned around them. Human and vessels worked together to collect survivors, a sight that would have been impossible just 1 day earlier. The treaty signing ceremony proceeded as planned, though the mood was different than anyone had expected. Instead of cautious optimism, there was genuine celebration. The exposure of the conspiracy had revealed just how close both civilizations had come to renewed war, and how much they had to gain from lasting peace. And Daniel stood in the gallery above the signing hall, watching as the leaders of their respective peoples put their names to the document that would end 8 years of bloodshed. "What happens now?" asked. Daniel considered the question. For so long he had lived with war as his only constant. Peace felt strange, like wearing clothes that did not quite fit. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have spent most of my life fighting. I am not sure what else I am good for." Took his hand. "You are good at many things. You are good at making children laugh. You are good at making me feel safe. You are good at loving me even when you did not want to. That was never hard." She smiled. "So what do you want, Daniel Cole? Now that the war is over, what does the future look like to you?" He thought about the refugee camp on Haven's Rest, about the small girl with the sad eyes and the brief smile. He thought about all the children who would grow up in a galaxy at peace, who would never know the horror of orbital bombardments or the grief of burying their friends. "I want to go home with my wife," he said slowly. "I want to find a quiet place somewhere between our worlds. I want to sleep through the night without dreaming of fire and death." "That sounds wonderful. And I want to start a family, if you are willing." His 4 eyes glistened with tears. "I am willing." Below them, the assembled dignitaries erupted in applause as the treaty was completed. The war was over. The peace had begun. Daniel put his arm around and held her close. They had started as strangers forced together by politics, two people from opposite sides of a bloody conflict. They had become partners, then friends, then lovers, and now they were something more. She had wanted peace. He had brought the end of the war. Together, they had proven that love was stronger than hate, that hope was stronger than fear, and that even in the darkest times, two people who chose to trust each other could change the course of history. The stars above New Geneva burned with the same light they had always held. But now, for the first time in 8 long years, that light held a promise instead of a threat. The promise of tomorrow.